Hello, BookTube. Today I'm going to be doing the Brandon Sanderson tag. It was created by Christie Louis of Dostoevsky in Space, and I was kindly tagged by Brian of Bookish. And I will be leaving links to both channels down below. Oh. Before we begin, I have to admit I've tried two novels by Brandon Sanderson. Obviously, if you've been watching my channel, you will know I've tried The Way of Kings twice. And I've also, the first time I tried Brandon Sanderson was his superhero YA novel Steelheart, which is basically about a group of superheroes gone bad. Basically, the empowering event has basically, in addition to giving superpowers, drives these nascent superhumans insane. And it's up to our hero to eventually defeat these superhumans. I didn't get too far into it before I bailed or DNF'd it. Didn't care for it. And then I've obviously bounced off of The Way of Kings in roughly the same place twice now. So I don't know if I'm going to go back to Brandon Sanderson. I might give him another go. Probably give The Way of Kings another go. I'm that sort of person. I'll keep trying, and even if I don't particularly care for this or that author. But anyway, let's get to the questions because they do sound pretty interesting. Question number 1. Brandon wrote many early novels while working as a night clerk at a Provo hotel. What book kept you reading late into the night? Well, I wouldn't say late into the night. There's pretty much a hard cutoff. But there are books that I really enjoy, I might read a little bit later than I normally do, particularly if I can finish them all in one night or relatively quickly. And the last book that I stayed up, relatively speaking, late to read is The Master of Go by Yasunari Kawabata. It's a shosetsu, which is basically a sort of a memoir novel, or a autofiction, as Steve Donahue would say. It's basically about Kawabata covering this major Go match between an established, though retiring, master and this up-and-coming competitor. And it is fantastic. Absolutely amazing. Every time I come to this work, it just keeps amazing me. Absolutely love it. Question number 2. Brandon's complex magic systems set his fantasy apart. I'd like to test that theory. I'm honestly not as impressed by Brandon's magic systems, although that could actually be more. I'm not entirely impressed by the praise and the sort of the turning it into writing advice. But anyway, what subject do you love to read about in all of its complexity? For that, I'm going to go with the Alexander the Great period and the early Hellenistic period, the War of the Successors. And for this, I'm going to go with two biographies of Alexander the Great. Soldier, Priest, and God by F.S. Naiden, which is a fantastic read. I read it last year for NaNoWriMo, and it was amazing. And Alexander the Great, His Life and His Mysterious Death by Anthony Everitt. I also have another biography of Alexander the Great. I need to get to this one. I have the Peter Green biography, and I will be getting, I'm thinking it's a joint biography of Philip II, Alexander the Great's father, and Alexander by Adrian Goldsworthy that is coming out in October. So yeah, and I have like one history of the War of the Successors, and I want some more. At least I think I have one. Yeah, I have one about the War of the Successors. So I would like some more. It is just an absolute fascinating period. That immediate aftermath and the decades after the death of Alexander. Question number 3. Brandon gets book ideas from watching other storytellers fail to execute a concept well. Shouldn't that be reading other storytellers failing? He figures out how to do it better, although not necessarily more concretely. And I promised myself I would not try to snipe at Brandon Sanderson during this tag. What 2 books handled the same concept in strikingly different ways, and which did you prefer? So I had a number of options for this one. 2 of the options I had, I was going to go with. I have one book, but I don't have both books to do the compare and contrast. But I do have one that I have both. And for this prompt, I'm going to go with The Ragged Blade by Christopher Ruz and The Unspoken Name by A.K. Larkwood. So basically what these 2 books have in common is a younger person comes under the tutelage of an older, more established sorcerer. And eventually the younger character who's the main protagonist, becomes a sort of assassin or an agent for this the sorcerer's will. And eventually, over the course of the story, the main character, the agent, betrays their master, their patron. And they go on a journey to, in contravention of what the sorcerer wants. I didn't like this book at all. There were some interesting bits, but it just really didn't work for me. So I much prefer The Unspoken Name by A.K. Larkwood. I loved her approach to generally the same subject. Number 4, or question number 4. Child Brandon was recommended several books about dogs that die. As a result, he became a reluctant reader. What? Okay. I'm not going to touch that. Please share a formative good or bad childhood reading experience. Now, I'm not entirely sure exactly whether or not the book was kind of condensed or cut down or edited, but one of my most formative reading experiences was reading the entirety of A Tale of Two Cities all in one sitting at daycare, or when I was having to spend the required time with my dad. That I occasionally would get a copy of A Tale of Two Cities and just read it cover to cover during the time I was at daycare or with him. And it just really I think set me on the course of being a reader, and reading perhaps above my age level, if you will. Although that is an incredibly nebulous number, but I don't really remember having read a whole lot of what would be considered middle grade, or certainly not YA novels. I always read what would already be considered adult fiction, even as a preteen. So I would go with The Tale of Two Cities. I could also go with maybe The Last of the Really Great Manga Doodles by Julie Andrews. That was a great novel. Question number 5. Brandon and several friends host the Writing Excuses podcast, which I really need to actually get caught up on. I subscribe to them on the iTunes, but I haven't watched or listened to them in a while. And they frequently invite guests. Please tell us about a collaborative fiction project and what you thought of it. So for this, and hopefully he's not watching my video, I'm going to go with The New Weird by Ann and Jeff Vandermeer. So in the end of... So the anthology, so this is an anthology collecting some early examples of the New Weird. So the New Weird is a sort of fusion genre between sort of the old weird that you would find in like old issues of Weird Tales, steampunk, body punk, just a lot of general punk literatures that were incredibly popular or coming up in the late 90s and early 2000s. And best typified by China Medieval. Anyway, so basically you have like a section of stories, and then there's this last part where basically a lot of different writers basically do like a round robin short story. Sort of like one would start and then they kind of continue it on, and I honestly didn't particularly care for it. I thought they would have been better off having more stories from like other contributors, but yeah, anyway. So yeah, I would go with that one. Although again, I didn't particularly care for it when I read it. Okay. Question number 6. Brandon's first book, White Sand Prime, was rewritten and eventually converted into a graphic novel called White Sands. What book would you like to see in another format? I was thinking of going with Hero by Perry Moore as a comic book, obviously. But I thought that was, or even say The Refrigerator Monologues by Catherine and Valenti, but that's kind of obvious right there. So I kind of went with, I'm going to go with Dune by Frank Herbert. I would love to see a graphic comic book or manga adaptation of Dune. I think that would be amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Question number 7. Brandon writes very quickly. What prolific author or authors would you recommend? I mean, obviously, within science fiction and fantasy, being a prolific writer is a boon. I mean, there is the expectation of having at least one book out a year. And I would go with, I'd say, Seanan Maguire. I think she's quite prolific. I don't know if Cameron Hurley's that prolific. And also I would go with Agatha Christie, who basically wrote at least 1 or 2 novels every year. And is, I think, always readable. So definitely Agatha Christie. Number 8. Brandon's Kazmir Universe books are grounded in Platonic philosophy. What book or series gets you really excited about the source material? For this, I'm going to go with The Last Son by Katie Edwards. I love his usage of the tarot as a sort of a structuring, world building element. I think it's fascinating and has gotten me interested in reading up more on the tarot, not necessarily as a divination, but as actually a card game. There are certain card games you can play using the tarot, so it's not just a divination tool. Also, a lot of how Edwards populates his fictionalized version of Nantucket or New Atlantis, is he takes old abandoned buildings, sometimes quite famous, and resituates them in this new cobbled together metropolis. And the histories of a lot of those buildings are very, very fascinating, and I would kind of find myself when I'm reading wanting to go and look up the actual histories behind these buildings. So that's really cool. And I think at the beginning of the next year, I'm going to do a reread of The Last Sun and The Hanged Man. And hopefully book 3 is going well. Okay. Question number 9. Brandon loves to show multiple sides of every issue and to contrast character values. Please share a book that handles controversy well. I had a lot of trouble with this prompt. Because I was thinking, so is this sort of a in-text controversy? So picking a novel and that handles the conflict very well, or some sort of socio-political conflict? Is it a sort of exterior to the book? In which case I was kind of sort of leaning in one direction, but I decided against it. Or just handling a difficult subject or controversial subject matter. And so I went with that. And for that, I'm going to go with, or that interpretation, I'm going to go with Ronald Hutton's The Witch. This is a history of the witch figure from or across the world, but primarily circling in on Europe and Britain. And it is amazing, particularly how Hutton sort of navigates the two interpretive schools of witchcraft studies, and how he sort of works through a lot of more modern sort of claims or reclamations on the witch figure. It's really quite good. Very, very dense and very, very academic, but still lovely book. And question number 10. Brandon Sanderson is a writing teacher, and unlike some writing teachers, he posts his lectures online for free. What free literature resource are you grateful for? So there's the Book Doctors, who are on YouTube. I do have one of their books, and obviously a lot of what they do online is geared towards getting you to get their book and their other services. But their channel is amazing. There's also like iWriterly, Hello Future Me here on YouTube. Obviously there is BookTube, Steve Donahue, SFF 180. Also a lot of universities have like will put up free courses and free lectures on their website or their YouTube channel. I don't know necessarily about writing courses. I think there's a few literature courses, but not a whole lot of. But I don't know about writing. I haven't really looked though. And of course, there's like the publishers. They have YouTube channels. Some booksellers do. I think the Brattle. I think they have a YouTube channel, although I haven't seen anything from them lately. There's Politics and Prose. So yeah, I mean, there's quite a few free resources and free sites and what have you. So yeah, anyway. And finally, tagging. I'm going to try to tag some people, although obviously if you see this video and, excuse me, you enjoyed it and would like to do it, consider yourselves tagged. If you would like me to tag you in future videos, please leave a comment and say, hey, please tag me in future tag videos, and I will make a note to do so. But I would like to specifically tag Mark Richardson of Richardson Reads, Jason of Byways and Bookland, Alan Bruswell, Sean D. Stanfast, and Matt Wall, the Paperback Junkie. I should have an... so that wraps up the Brandon Sanderson tag, and I should have a tag up, not a tag, a video, writing video up tomorrow, since I will be starting... it's 1st of July, and I was planning on starting the rewrite for Akarsha the Sorcerer, so yeah. And I'm working on an idea for that. So yeah. Until tomorrow, BookTube, thank you, have a great afternoon, and please stay safe.